Abdullah the Butcher was like a nightmare come to life. He terrified people.
Just a savage, bloody, thirsty machine.
Trying to rip the eyeball.
When Abdullah walks in the ring, you know you're going to get blood. Every match he was in, he bled. You bled.
Oh my God, right on the head.
One of the most infamous wrestlers of all time, Abdullah the Butcher, left a legacy of violence and bloodshed wherever he went, from Puerto Rico to Japan and across North America.
Abdullah! Think about what he's experiencing. He's getting cooked.
You can't think of a heel that was bigger than Abdullah. You can't.
He made money everywhere he went.
But the more money we made, the more danger we had to face.
Even though Abdullah was playing a character, inside, that was him.
He would have people with slingshots hitting him and throwing things at him because they think he's hurt the damn guy.
Fans at ringside, when he got too close, I mean, they were running.
Everybody's bloodthirsty. Everybody is bloodthirsty. They want it.
Notorious for blurring the line between reality and fiction, Abdullah remained a mystery even to those closest to him.
See, you all know the wrestler. You don't know the person.
He's a hero all the time. He was a very good person.
In a gruesome but successful career spanning 7 decades, Abdullah's thirst for blood made him infamous, but also led to his downfall.
He cost me my WWE career. That was a fact. The Hep C caused me not to have my WWE contract. You're a piece of shit, and I hope that when you die a really slow and painful death.
Acting like he finds the taste of the blood pleasurable.
Abdullah the Butcher would come into a regional wrestling territory and just set business on fire.
Blood everywhere!
The difference between Abdullah and everyone else is when anyone else came into the territory, fans were rooting for their favorite to win. When Abdullah came in, they were rooting for their favorite to survive.
Oh, what a vicious chop. He's getting ready to carve up a steak there and eat it.
Hello, I'm Mick Foley, sometimes known as the Hardcore Legend, and I have been involved with professional wrestling since 1985. I knew of the legend of Abdullah because in those days you learned about people outside of your geographic area largely by the magazines. And the magazines painted this amazing portrait of this unstoppable monster. I was so intrigued by Abdullah the Butcher that the first thing I did when I got to college as a freshman is I put a black and white photo of him on the wall and began to tell the entire dormitory that he was my father.
When you have those taekwondo karate pants and you see him with a fork with all those gigantic cuts and he opens those big eyes and you see him on promos eating liver and the blood of the liver coming out, that's Abdullah the Butcher, and he was unstoppable. My name is Hugo Sabinovich. I'm from Guayaquil, Ecuador, and I've been in this passionate industry for close to 50 years, and I will do it again. Love Lucha Libre. No one was safe.
Here he comes again. He hits Bronco. Love it.
Not the referee, not the owner of the company. He will put fear into your body, into your brain, your soul.
What's happening in here? Can you explain to everybody what you're watching?
Yeah, eating the raw meat, chicken, and he could even take a phone book and tear it in half. My name's Josephine Heron Shreve. Abdullah the Butcher is my brother. Windsor at that time, when I was growing up, I always say that's old school. And it was like we was raised in a 2-bedroom house, wartime house. There was 8 of us. 2 or 3 of us slept in a bed together. I had my own room
because I slept in the bathtub. I had a cushion to put in there. My father and I have to go to the bathroom. They piss in a can. My mother had to come in the washroom. She knock on the door, and I get out of the tub and let her in. Because I don't think my mother wanted to piss in a can. Okay, that's the way it was. My name is Ralph Shreves. I am Larry Paul Shreves' brother as Abdullah the Butcher. I call him Larry. That's his name to me. Abdullah the Butcher is his money name, his wrestling name. If you ever interview him, you just look at his damn head. Do you ever interview him? Oh, there you go then. I guess he tells the truth, but I'll tell you one thing. There, I think you should be better off talking to him a longer distance. You have your ass jump up in 1 minute. And you scared to death. He's a good actor.
Oh yeah, we just gotta.
I wanted to take it off to say, oh, I got my head off. Let me take my head off.
Looking good.
There he is.
There he is.
Oh, it really is you.
Yeah, that's it. My name is Larry Shreve. My other wrestling name is Abdullah the Butcher. I'm from Khartoum, Sudan, but now, since I'm pretty near out, I'm from Khartoum, Sudan, Windsor, Ontario.
Your parents had to take care of a lot of kids. Like, was it challenging?
Oh, they worked hard. My mother worked hard. My dad worked hard.
Yeah.
When I see my mother on the floor, scrubbing floors, at a funeral home, I said to myself, holy shit, my mother works hard. But I never knew that she was on her hands and knees until I went there. I didn't want to learn how to read or write because I was only worrying about my mother and father. I wanted to make money. I used to buy candy, 3 for a penny, go to school, and you want to buy some candy, right? I'd sell it for maybe a penny a piece or whatever. Where the kids owed me money, and I said, when are you going to pay me my money? So maybe he got scared, like I was going to do something, right? So he wouldn't go to school. Maybe his mother came and says, my kid is scared to come to school. And that was it. Then I said, I got to get out of here and try to make some, money where I don't have a problem. And that's what I done.
So Larry only finished the 2nd grade?
He only finished the grade 2nd. I was a year smarter than him, and I'm not really that smart myself. But I'm saying we done a lot. Larry, he went to people's houses knocking on their door and asking for old clothes and all that. And he had a second-hand store with all kinds of old clothes, and he had a store.
He shined shoes for years. Then he got a janitorial service business.
He had people cutting grass and all that. He had a truck where he went around moving stuff out of people's basements and all that. He was a worker.
Let's just say he was always a hustler.
He been in the karate and all that. He had a karate place where, like senior citizens, he trained them to learn how to defend themselves. That's right in Windsor. You had about 8 or 9 old ladies in their 60s and 70s, and he had it where they could defend themselves. Just old people and that.
I was down at the Windsor Arena, and I was doing karate and stuff like that, and the manager of the place, he said, hey, you should be a wrestler. I said, oh, I don't want to do that crap. He said, you can make some money. I said, oh, okay.
Abdullah crosses the river to Detroit, where he meets the original Sheik, one of the innovators of hardcore wrestling.
Wait a minute, the Sheik has got that fire! How about that despicable act of fighting?
Abdullah playing an Arabic wrestler, they only had one at that time, and that was, they called him the Sheik, not the Iron Sheik, the Sheik out of Detroit. He used to do all that stuff. Cut you with your forehead, walk around crazy.
The
Hold out that fireball!
Hi, this is Mr. USA WWE Hall of Famer Tony Atlas. Grew up watching The Sheik. He imitating The Sheik.
His eyes out of his camel clutch or anything of that nature. Wait a minute, that's my spark.
Corner post. Oh, this is a grudge match. This is war.
I told my dad, I said, Dad, I'm wrestling at Cobo Hall. My dad says, those are some dangerous people over there. My dad used to see me with cuts on my head. He told my mother, tell him that you better get out of that shit. I said, Dad, listen, smack me. He said, for what? I said, just smack me. He went, you see me bleeding. He said, I didn't hit you that hard. Then I showed him the blade. He said, now I know you're crazy.
Having learned this bloody trick of the trade, Abdullah travels the world showcasing his hardcore style. While working in Puerto Rico, he meets promoter Carlos Colon and his right-hand man, Hugo Savinovich.
I started working with Carlos, and they say, you're good, but you're not big enough. He says, I want to make you a manager. And then he says, by the way, we're bringing into Puerto Rico one monster, Abdullah the Butcher, and I have heard of him. And I said, wow, I mean, what a way to begin a managing career. Managing him, it was, just a crazy, crazy way of earning a living.
Everybody just going crazy here.
By 1983, he was already drawing gigantic money in the Caribbean islands and Puerto Rico. People will fill up the stadiums. Abdullah will make the promoter, Carlos Colon, look good. But at the same time, he will destroy him.
Perhaps the fear of being involved in this match.
Abdullah would wrestle in Puerto Rico for a couple of months. He wrestled in Japan for a couple of months. And then he would come back to the States.
Whoa.
And he was a big draw. I mean, wherever he went, he drew money.
Abdullah was worth every penny that he got paid, and trust me, he was making huge money. He lived really like a rich guy.
Abdullah was very, very cautious of his money. When he got paid, as soon as you give it to him, he'd count it.
I made sure my mother and father, my brothers and sisters, got some of it. My mother used to work for the funeral home and stuff like that. I went there one day and I said, come on, Ma. She said, what? She said, I want you to meet Mrs. I said, I don't want to meet them. You understand? You're here scrubbing floors and stuff like that, and I'm supposed to be Abdullah the Butcher, and you're on your hands and knees scrubbing floors and stuff. From that day, she never worked another day in her life. And I made sure of that. But I was dumb. I didn't have the schooling. Like I tell you, if I know what I know now, everybody shafts me. You understand?
Despite his successful and profitable rise to fame, Abdullah today finds himself in legal trouble and financial ruin.
What has the whole situation been like for you personally?
Hell. You don't know who in the hell's working with you or working against you. You understand? I'm in bad shape. Real bad shape.
And anybody, anywhere, that does not fear the name of the almighty Abdullah the Butcher is either an insane fool or they're lying to you.
With Larry Shreve, yeah, it could be really difficult for a fan to know where the character ends, where the real person begins.
He has reigned terror in the wrestling business.
For someone who rode with him for hundreds of hours, you get to know the real guy or what he wants to show you of the real guy.
Abdullah the Butcher moves swiftly for a big man.
See, he always talk about he's an entertainer. He's entertaining you. But the real true person, you all don't know. My name is Jocelyn Malika Marshall. I met Abdullah while I was on the streets feeding the homeless. He told me his name was Joe, and I was just so excited to see somebody else out there like myself feeding the homeless. So I didn't know he had a restaurant. Gave me the address of the restaurant, and I brought my son over there. My son said, "Do you know who that is?" He said, "That's Abdullah the Butcher." And I said, "Who is that?" Because I'm not into wrestling. Abdullah was his hero.
Your son liked all the bad guys.
He loved the bad guys, yes.
Abdullah was the best heel that the world ever saw. Even picture in my head now, just the way he stands, the way he moved around the ring, and the things he did. To see a whole crowd of people move back. He could walk through an aisle and people would run from him. And when he come through that ring, people go, uh-oh, here come Abdullah. It got so, it wasn't a gimmick.
He was in character most of the time, especially when we went in public. I remember seeing a flight attendant go over to him, and as soon as Abdullah saw that flight attendant, his eyes bugged out, his mouth started watering, and she tried to like get his beverage order and just walked away. I was like, "Abby, are you okay?" He goes, "Gotta protect the character, champ. Gotta protect the character." And that's what he would do. And so he, in his own way, he would create this grassroots campaign for the authenticity of his character.
When he went into the ring with any wrestler, he made them a good wrestler.
If you fight Abdullah, you fought Abdullah, you got over it. People knew you the next day.
They got like a crown on their head because they're wrestling one of the best.
That's why I say Abdullah made Carlos Colon. Abdullah made Tony Mr. USA Atlas. Everybody that fought Abdullah became a big star.
Here comes Hart. There goes Kevin Van Duty battle continues between Abdullah and Kevin Van Erich.
Here he is with a big karate thrust to the head of the Dirty Dutch Mantel.
What really made Abdullah was the time in Japan. In Japan, during that time, wrestling was still about 7% real. If you got a karate kick in Japan, it was a real karate kick. You got chopped in Japan, it was a real chop. The only thing that was fake in Japan was who won and who lost. He was on the cover of all these magazines. They had billboards of Abdullah, pictures of Abdullah.
He was what I call crazy over. Like, he was an iconic part of Japanese culture.
Good throw. That's fine. Doesn't bother me at all.
As crazy as this might sound, he recorded an album in Japan, in the dressing room.
My name is Abdullah the Butcher. I want to do all these crazy things to you. My own family hates me because I'm too vicious.
They never seen nothing like me. I was different. They only seen the wrestling, That was it. I was different.
Having found success with the hardcore style he adapted from the Sheik, Abdullah becomes a mentor to wrestler Devin Nicholson. But this long-term friendship will end in disaster.
I actually ended his career. Retired him in the ring, retired him out of the ring. My name is Devin Nicholson, and my wrestling name was Hannibal.
There will be no more Abdullah after the 23rd.
No class, no idea how to dress.
Starting his career with Stampede Wrestling in 2001, Devin begins working under the name Madman Hannibal and soon launches his own indie promotion, Great North Wrestling. In 2006, he begins working with Abdullah.
Before all the negative stuff happened, I actually considered him somewhat of a mentor, and I would say he was the first wrestler to take me under his wing a bit and teach me about how to get heat and stuff. We ended up tag teaming and wrestling each other numerous times.
I used to work for him.
Right, you guys were friends, weren't you?
Yeah, I used to fly into Toronto or whatever, and we had shows. He'd come out to Calgary, Alberta. We'd have shows. You understand?
Abdullah, you think I'm not ready for you? I'm gonna catch you in your last match in Canada.
There will be some people that will always hate me for exposing him, but whatever. I don't care. I stopped him from wrestling.
Already 68 years old and 6 decades into his career, Abdullah returns to Canada to wrestle Hannibal in what's being billed as his retirement match.
I remember my first experience of Abdullah. My grandmother was actually somewhat of a wrestling fan, and I remember she let me rent a wrestling movie called I Like to Hurt People.
Against the Butcher from the Sudan, Abdullah the Butcher.
And I just remember thinking, how did they make this blood effect? You didn't really know how they did blood in those days. I'll probably have to edit this. And I know Bret Hart would put it in his mouth, he said, but I was always afraid to do that. So then you would take the blade and put it like there and tape over top. And then when it comes time to bleed, you'd pull it out. And then, I'm not gonna do it, I'm not Abdullah, but you'd slice down like that.
Now, for me to hit myself, I would hit myself like this. You see it?
I was around Abdullah a lot, and you never actually see him do the deed. The blood would arrive as if, by magic.
Abdullah had razor blades on all his fingers. First, he cut you with the razor blade.
And what does he got? He's got a fork.
And then he would take the fork and scrape it across it to make it bigger so it could bleed more. He actually would stick that fork, he would stick you with that fork too. He's like stabbing you in the head with that fork, hurt like hell.
That's Abdullah the Butcher.
He would cut you deep.
Well, did anybody ever complain about being cut?
Not to Abdullah. Because, you see, in the older days, the guys would tell you this, suck it up. If you don't like it, you're in the wrong business, kid. Suck it up. There was no bitching and complaining in wrestling. I didn't carry blade because I didn't juice every night. But this was part of these guys' gimmick.
Abdullah the Butcher. It could be over.
Abdullah, Bruiser Brody, Dusty Roll. Abdullah blade every night. Every night. It's kind of like Ric Flair gotta have the roll. Well, Abdullah gotta have the blade.
Why do they call him Abdullah the Butcher? What does a butcher do? They take to make blood. They try to hurt you, to torture you.
Mm-hmm.
This guy here, he was rushed to the hospital, had 4 stitches in the back of the head, because this guy chopped him in the damn head and got cut. Don't think that this is all phony blood.
Abdullah's intense bloodlust and unpredictable style keeps him from signing with the world's largest promotion, Vince McMahon's WWE.
Vince kind of knew that Abdullah was going to be very hard to be controlled. And I think that if you would even ask Abdullah, I don't think he even trusted himself, because I don't think a lot of the times he planned things.
We were going to have a tag team match in Ottawa, and before the match, we were appearing on a local television show called Rogers Daytime.
I just happened to have a fork right here. Huh? With the old,
And without this being planned or anything,
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
he put the male host in a headlock, walked the male host over to where there was going to be a cooking segment after. And then the guy started bleeding.
Settle! Back off! Are you gonna manage us Friday?
You know what?
You should come with me. I come to the show on Friday.
It was the weirdest moment ever. The guy was like, I just remember him shaking like that. He was like going to shock almost. It was like a guy that obviously isn't used to bleeding or getting in fights or anything.
We'll be right back after this.
I think that was 2009. You couldn't even really get away with it then. It was a miracle he did. But you could see like how in the old days he could get away with stuff like that. But I think in 2022, it would be hard to assault a TV show host and get away with it. I think he was in his late 60s by then too, so it certainly helped.
After years on the independent circuit and mentorship from Abdullah, Hannibal finally achieves his own opportunity to wrestle for the WWE.
When I was signed by WWE, he actually screamed with joy, because I guess since he never actually wrestled for them, and it was kind of like someone that kind of represented him in a way was going to get in.
But after a series of routine blood tests, Hannibal receives career-shattering news.
In my blood test, they found that the hepatitis C virus was present, and I was like, well, first of all, I was confused on like how I would have such a thing.
A lot of guys would use dirty razor blades, because everybody didn't carry blades. Everybody didn't carry blades. Until we say something like, "Hey, Abby, you got a blade I could use?" Then he gonna use the blade, and you know when you boil something, you got to do what? Give it back, and they would give it back to Abdullah. So it was very easy for somebody to catch a disease, because who knows where that blade came from or who they cut before they cut Hannibal.
Did it cross your mind at that point that it might have been Abdullah?
Yes, because there was no other way that I would have thought that I would have caught it. But I wasn't, like at this point, I didn't think that I would have the evidence or anything.
At some point, you and this guy Hannibal were friendly with each other, right?
Yeah, we were good friends. I used to work for him. He was a promoter.
Right.
So, I don't know what happened, but I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about it.
His career cut short by his hepatitis C diagnosis, Hannibal is desperate for answers.
I had a guy that was doing a documentary on me. It's called This Is Hannibal. We were hoping that it was going to be my journey to WWE movie, but it ended up just being like a sad movie.
Obviously, it didn't work out. The contract got rescinded because I have hepatitis C.
So he was the one that actually saw the cutting incident, and he showed me the clip from the 2007 match. And he's like, "What is Abdullah doing here?"
I haven't even seen footage of the match, to be honest with you. I would love to see it.
You can see here he's cutting his own head with his razor blade that's taped to his finger, right where all the scars are on his forehead, what he's been doing for the past 50 years. And you see him doing that to my forehead. So I'm like, he's blading me.
Oh my God, so 8 years managing him in different countries, I never saw him doing that to another guy. And if that's the case, wow.
Many local news stations saw my movie and did their own stories on it, because Ottawa, I don't think ever had somebody that had made WWE. Ronald Kaza, one of the top lawyers in this area, saw the case, and with his skill as a lawyer, he was able to basically force Abdullah to provide his blood test. According to his blood work, there's a history of Hep C, so you would think that he knew, but whether he knew or not, he should have known it's dangerous to cut someone with a razor blade with blood on it.
The footage of Abdullah cutting Hannibal with a used razor blade and the results of Abdullah's blood test form the basis of a lawsuit filed by Hannibal. A lawsuit that Abdullah claims he couldn't read or understand.
I was getting a lot of letters, right? What am I going to do? Open it up? I don't know what the hell it says. If it wasn't for Malika, no. I'd really be in bad shape.
And he sat me down. He said, "Sit down, Malika." But he told me he didn't know how to read and write, and he cried like a baby. A big, huge man like this, crying. I never seen a man cry like that. that's when I understood what was going on in his life. And he would ask me to open his mail and read it to him. And after I looked through it, it included the court case with Devon Nicholson. I don't know anything about that.
My sister called me and said, "You lost the case in Toronto." I said, "What?" And it was default. That's what, because I didn't show up. And that was it. Okay.
When you aspire to be a professional wrestler, this is how you celebrate a legal victory.
He ended up losing in court in both Ontario and Georgia. And he was found guilty of negligence, assault, and battery. He either knew or should have known that he had Hep C, which Abdullah still denies, even though he provided the blood tests.
Court documents show that Abdullah carries the same rare strain of hepatitis C as Hannibal. In the years that follow, Abdullah makes a range of claims, including the allegation that it was Hannibal who gave the disease to him. After the Canadian judge sees the video evidence, coupled with the confirmation that both men share the same rare strain of Hep C, the courts side with Hannibal.
It's very good to have that on the record after all these years of being called a liar.
Devon Nicholson was awarded $2.3 million in damages.
No, I don't think they should pay. No, not that much. No.
What should he have gotten?
Nothing. I wouldn't have sued him. When you get into a certain profession, you're taking a risk. Hannibal could have done it himself. That's what the guys told me. Tony, he don't change his blade. Do it yourself. He let Abdullah cut him. He could have cut himself, but he was scared to cut himself, so he got somebody else do it. And it cost him.
In dire financial straits, Abdullah continues to make wrestling-related appearances and autograph signings. Hannibal claims that Abdullah has moved around his assets in order to avoid paying him, and to this day, the matter is still in front of the courts.
He's never paid anything. Hasn't paid a penny.
Nah, I don't think he have it.
I want you all to look at this. This is dangerous. This is stuff that you have ever seen. Look at this.
Oh boy.
He has no money to repair none of this. Now this is a light fixture where the water is coming down. This is electrical. Listen.
This is how his house is right now, currently.
Right now, currently. That's why I didn't allow you all to come back there. Oh, I am stressed. I'm stressed. I've never had blood pressure until I got moved into his house. But it's worth it when you see someone being taken advantage of him. He built a career.
Should have went to school. Should have went to school to learn how to read and write. I studied money. But I needed more than that. I got shafted. All the tapes, what I made for many, many years, got nothing.
Whatever he's going through, that was all his anyways. I don't want to say too much, I just tell her that's the truth. My brother, don't worry, my brother he's a very nice person, but people play games with him.
Are you aware that he says that he can't read or write? Did he ever tell you that he can't read or write?
No, and I've seen him order at restaurants, reading menus. I've seen letters from him. I've seen him sign autographs. He's owned several businesses over the years and been involved with large wrestling contracts with companies like WCW and Japanese companies.
So he can't read or write?
Nope, he never could. But he'd find ways, like, if they told him, like, to go to a chicken farm or something like that, he'd draw a picture of a chicken.
I don't mean this to be humorous, but like he knew how to read a menu. You know, like we would eat out 3 times a day. He never had an issue. I don't know if that's the case. If it is, I think it's just, it's an accolade for him to be that successful around the world without that ability. But I don't know. I've only recently heard that.
That's like a shock to me because he made great business transactions. Even in a check, you have to write it. I did not know that. And 8 years we travel a lot, spend a lot of time together, and that is a shock to me. If that is a guy of a 2nd grade education, wow, that whoever was the teacher, we gotta find him or her and honor that person because that teacher did a lot.
Abdullah the Butcher himself getting stitched up right here.
The punishing style of hardcore wrestling has a long legacy, but it often comes at great personal cost for those involved.
Abdullah and Carlos Colon invented a match with a chain going right across the ring, and they were hooked to it. And even with the rain, a storm, you could still see just all the blood coming down. It was horrendous, but for the fans, it was just devastating, the punishment that they inflicted on each other.
We felt invincible, and they trained you to feel invincible.
At those times, we would put the blood of their opponent as part of being a heel and suck the blood out of your opponent's head. When I talk about it right now, I see the expressions on the new generation, like, what the heck were you guys thinking? But, you know, back then, it was a whole different world.
Anytime you watch something, even if you watch a movie picture or something like that, they always have violence in it, right? You have like the cops and the robbers, you have this and stuff like that. It's always violence. And if you don't give the people violence, they don't come and see you.
In a twist of fate in 2021, 7 years after his own court battle, Hannibal finds himself at the center of his own controversy by brutalizing a referee.
They were looking for someone to bleed from the spike, so the promoter found this referee that was a known bleeder to take the spike. It hit him several times and it did some damage. The promoter for that show did not have any medics on site. It went on longer than it should have. Like, it was bad communication all around.
Guy, the referee, he ended up getting an infection. His head was, mutilated.
I was appalled. I saw the dude's head with, a dozen different gaffs with staples in his head. And I'm just like, what in the heck happened here? Why have charges not been pressed? Why is this guy not in jail? Even your story is saying you were recklessly, dangerously careless and damn near killed this guy because you're just sloppy. And if we believe that he got mad and actually attacked this guy with a spike, it's like, you should be in jail. You should never be booked to wrestle again. This is not good for the business. This isn't 1960 where we're going to convince somebody that he's the madman from the Sudan that attacked somebody with a spike. There's no place for that in the industry anymore.
Oh my God, that even makes no sense. You just were in a situation and wow, strange things do happen, because what are the chances that you win a court case and now you're going to do that to a referee? Crazy.
To this day, Abdullah's legal problems haunt him, and the hepatitis C controversy has tainted the legacy of his legendary career.
I know it was horrendous to hear, because you never want to hear that somebody did this to another guy. But then you also wonder, because in my case, I was around him in bloody matches, and Carlos Colon and other guys. But none of us tested, positive to that.
Hannibal eventually finds an experimental treatment that cures him of his hepatitis C, but his bitterness remains.
Is there anything that he could do to make this right?
Yes. I mean, start paying what you can, and take some responsibility for what you did. You've been found guilty in both Canada and the U.S., but you never apologized for anything. And yeah, it's just been a nightmare situation. But I would never expect that from him. So all I can do is move on, which I have been doing. I'll be honest, talking about this situation, I mean, this is hopefully the last time I'll have to talk about it. It was a terrible period of my life, and I'm over it.
Because the lawsuit is argued in a civil trial, the judge found Abdullah the Butcher liable, but not guilty, of causing Hannibal's hepatitis C.
This is the Hall of Fame, and all these wrestlers here, these are the old ones. They're probably all dead now. They're all in the Hall of Fame with Abdullah the Butcher. Well, I put it this way: all my family is his biggest fan. He done good, and I hate to say this. There's a lot of good wrestlers, and I put it this way: he's one of the best.
Being around our next inductee always made me a little nervous. This is a man who took hardcore to another level. Take a look.
In 2011, Abdullah the Butcher is inducted into the WWE's Hall of Fame.
When I found out I was going to be in the Hall of Fame, I says, I don't believe it until they booked me there, And Terry Funk was the one who put me over strong, said nice things about me. He said, whatever people say about Abdullah the Butcher, he made these promoters a lot of money.
I cried because I know the story that to be what he became, he paid the price. And yes, he made the money, but it wasn't easy being Abdullah the Butcher.
What's missing in wrestling today is the idea that an opponent is fighting for something bigger than a title or a victory. They're fighting for their lives. That's what he brought to the table, and I don't know if anyone ever did it better than Abdullah the Butcher.
I never seen anybody that the fan was actually afraid of. They was afraid of him. And I never seen that. I never saw that with anybody.
I think he should be remembered for his greatness. His greatness because he is the God of wrestling. Not the negative, just one little situation, and it's not proven. He didn't get a chance to prove his innocence. I don't care if they take everything he owns. I would never turn my back on a man of greatness, such greatness. He's gonna be okay with the help of God.
Long after you're gone, what would you like people to think when they hear the name Abdullah the Butcher?
Just to give me the respect for what I done, and a lot of things people say I done, I did not do. You know what I mean? And that's all I can say. Whatever you want to think, I'll leave it up to you.
Welcome to a journey into the darkest, most compelling corners of sports entertainment history. Step back in time to the evening of June 28, 1998. The setting is the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view event. Inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, an audience of 16,000 people eagerly awaits a spectacle that would forever alter the landscape of professional wrestling. On this night, two legendary figures, The Undertaker and Mankind, are slated to step inside a structure designed to inspire absolute dread, Hell in a Cell. According to the sources mentioned, this match would ultimately earn its place as one of the most shocking and controversial encounters in the annals of the industry. Hell in a Cell was a concept that hit the collective consciousness of the audience like a heavy mallet. It was an environment designed to be brutal, but no one, not the fans, not the executives, and certainly not the performers themselves, knew just how far past the edge of sanity this particular match would go. This was a collision of two talents who pushed the absolute limits of physical endurance until the envelope completely tore open. Professional wrestling is often debated for its scripted nature, but as the old industry adage goes, you cannot fake gravity. According to those involved, veterans of the business who had been frightened by countless stunts over the decades had never experienced the sheer terror that they would witness on this night. What left the fans in the locker room completely stunned was the unrelenting, unimaginable punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind the Mankind mask, endured. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply would not believe that a human being could physically subject themselves to such trauma and live to tell the tale. The pain was real. The drama was profoundly real. Backstage, peers and producers were cursing, screaming, and questioning the sanity of a man putting his life on the line. One of wrestling's most infamous matches. This Hell in a Cell bout possesses a legacy that persists as both an epic television triumph and a dark cautionary tale. Looking back, industry insiders acknowledge that they dodged several fatal bullets that day. It is truly chilling to realize that a major corporation would allow a performer to be rendered completely unconscious and then permit the match to continue. The collateral damage that ensued from this night, and the nights that followed, opens up a much deeper, more troubling conversation. When does it stop? When is the sacrifice enough? Performers pay all day long for the rest of their lives for the decisions they make during their 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but everyone who witnesses it must ask themselves the ultimate question: was it worth it? To understand the madness of that night, we must first analyze the psychology of Mick Foley. According to those involved, everyone who enters the professional wrestling business is searching for something missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the motivation was rooted in a deep, overwhelming need to be accepted. Having been teased heavily in his youth, Foley craved the adulation of a crowd, but he found a very unconventional way to achieve it. The material suggests that during his sophomore year in college, Foley performed a stunt in his dormitory to get a reaction. He took a swig of red food coloring, climbed onto a bed, and delivered a flying leap onto a concrete floor, spitting out the fake blood upon impact. When a female student cried out that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, Foley felt an immense surge of power. He realized that if he could not make people love him conventionally, he could perhaps captivate them by disgusting them. He simply needed to get reactions. This philosophy birthed the hardcore legend. Hell in a Cell is often cited as the perfect gateway for new wrestling fans. But it sets an impossible standard. According to the sources mentioned, a standard Mick Foley match before his time in the World Wrestling Federation was already unimaginably brutal. He built his reputation in Japanese death matches involving thumbtacks, fire, barbed wire, and even explosive materials like plastic explosives. He would take falls directly onto unpadded concrete. He put his body through an agonizing amount of punishment simply to elicit a shocked response from the audience. Realism was his greatest tool. Foley operated under the belief that he did not have a good match unless he had physical trouble. Walking back to his hotel room, he did not enjoy the pain itself, but he deeply enjoyed the fact that he could endure it and present it to an audience in a way that captivated them. However, the man behind the madness was vastly different from his on-screen personas. According to his wife, Colette Foley, who has known him for over 35 years, Mick was a gentle, kind person with a penchant for corny jokes and terrible humor. Their wedding song was the theme from Beauty and the Beast, a perfect metaphor for their relationship. Colette understood his commitment to his craft. She knew that when the adrenaline was pumping, his sole drive was to ensure the fans left talking about how great the show was, even at his own tremendous risk. Before he was Mankind, Foley developed a character named Cactus Jack, a wild, unpredictable persona that made audiences genuinely question his sanity. He possessed a bizarre charisma. You simply could not take your eyes off him. Jim Cornette, a former agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation, noted that Foley was a master of ring psychology. He understood that fans were drawn to characters who appeared entirely out of control and went against the established script. By taking the audience on a chaotic ride, he commanded their attention, and his reputation grew immensely. Foley's dedication to the craft was absolute. He and Colette lived modestly, sleeping on a mattress on the floor with a black and white television and a struggling videocassette recorder. On that machine, Foley would study Japanese wrestling tapes for up to 12 hours a day. He was captivated by the realism and storytelling of the Japanese style, where a wrestler had to defeat not just their opponent, but the dangerous surroundings as well. He believed Japan would be the primary place he made his living. Eventually, Japanese promoters sought a foreign talent to feud with the legendary Terry Funk. Funk, renowned for his ability to make fans suspend their disbelief instantly, became a mentor to Foley. Together, they engaged in explosive, bloody, and fiery death matches. Foley was drawn to the wild elements, willing to crawl on his hands and knees through dangerous debris, viewing it as proof that he was creating something truly special. Because of this extreme style, Foley never envisioned himself working for the World Wrestling Federation. At that time, the company presented a highly sanitized, family-friendly product. Vince McMahon, the chairman of the company, had absolutely no interest in hiring Mick Foley. According to the sources mentioned, McMahon did not think Foley was marketable and did not believe he had the physical appearance of a star. It was Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations at the time, who championed Foley. Ross needed compelling opponents for The Undertaker, one of the biggest stars in the history of the industry. McMahon kept pairing The Undertaker with giant, lumbering opponents, which resulted in dull encounters. Ross argued that what The Undertaker truly needed was a lunatic. Vince McMahon eventually relented, but with a harsh caveat. According to Jim Ross, McMahon agreed to bring Foley in only on the condition that they cover his face, strip away his past identity, and present him as a complete unknown. The creative team was tasked with building a character out of nothing, which resulted in the birth of Mankind, a tortured, masked intellectual who dwelled in boiler rooms. Industry veterans like Gerald Briscoe acknowledged that this bizarre concept would have failed completely with anyone other than Mick Foley. Foley fully committed to the character, pulling his own hair out and speaking in disturbing riddles. Without that profound connection to the audience and his absolute commitment, the character would have been meaningless. Jim Ross's primary goal was for Foley to serve as a great rival for The Undertaker. But Ross soon faced the monumental challenge of keeping Foley from accidentally killing himself in the process. Foley was willing to try anything. The rivalry between Mankind and The Undertaker laid a massive foundation, spanning 7 pay-per-view matches, 10 television matches, and countless international tours. However, by 1998, Foley felt his character had plateaued. He knew he needed to do something drastic, something that would elevate rather than detract from his legacy with The Undertaker. For the King of the Ring event, producers planned to reignite the feud using a recently developed match concept, Hell in a Cell. Traditional cage matches required a competitor to escape over the top or through the door. The new concept placed a roof on the structure, creating a closed environment where 2 men enter. And theoretically, only one walks out. The inaugural Hell in a Cell match had taken place between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, and it was considered an absolute masterpiece, setting a nearly impossible standard. Foley watched that first match in awe, realizing he could not athletically replicate anything those 2 men had done. When tasked with facing The Undertaker in the same structure 9 months later, Foley sought advice from his mentor, Terry Funk. According to the materials, Funk jokingly suggested that they should start the match on top of the cell and that Foley should be thrown off. While Funk laughed, Foley stopped and seriously stated that he thought he could do it. He could not get the idea out of his head. Foley pitched the idea of being thrown off the roof to Vince McMahon and The Undertaker. The Undertaker was initially entirely against throwing his opponent off a structure of that height. However, Foley was dead set on the idea, and eventually he managed to convince everyone involved. Foley did not view this match as the second act of his career. Rather, he was just trying to keep his head above water, fully believing that when this run was over, his career would be finished. The Undertaker trusted Foley. If Foley said he could see the spot in his head and execute it, The Undertaker believed him. The pressure heading into the match was unimaginable. Foley knew he had to outdo the legendary Shawn Michaels match. Despite not being the most nimble athlete, the stakes were heavily promoted by the announcers, warning that the loser might bypass the hospital and go straight to the morgue. As The Undertaker's iconic entrance music played, filling the Pittsburgh Civic Arena with an ominous dread, the audience was completely in the dark about what was to come. Foley wanted to start the match in a way no one had ever done before. As he began to climb the outside of the cage, shock washed over the crowd. The match was supposed to take place inside the structure. Foley had assured management that he had been on top of the cell during rehearsals. But according to his own admission, this was completely false. He was actually terrified of heights. As he stood 20 feet in the air, he wondered how he could gracefully climb back down without ruining his career. The match officially began on the roof. It immediately created an intense psychological fear among the audience and the personnel backstage. The top section of the cage was held together by plastic zip ties. With nearly 600 pounds of human weight shifting across it, the mesh began to buckle and sag by almost a foot. The terrifying sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. Foley attempted a maneuver, but The Undertaker fought him off, moving them perilously close to the edge of the structure, right above the small, distant announce tables below. Those watching, from the producers to the commentators, could not believe that a fall from that height was actually going to happen. The margin for error was infinitesimally small. Then, the unbelievable occurred. The Undertaker grabbed Foley and flung the 300-pound man off the edge of the cell. From almost 20 feet in the air, Foley plummeted toward the Spanish announce table. According to those involved, time seemed to slow down, yet the impact happened in the blink of an eye. The thunderous crash of a human body obliterating the table sent shockwaves through the arena. The sound was terrifying. Backstage, peers erupted in pure concern. It was described as being akin to witnessing a fatal car accident. Announcers Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were visibly shaken. Many people watching truly believed they had just witnessed a man die on live television. Foley's ability to survive the fall was credited to his precise mid-air rotation, allowing him to land flat on the desk to cushion the impact. Had The Undertaker thrown him a fraction too far or too short, Foley would have hit the concrete floor or landed in the crowd, which could have been instantly fatal. Backstage, the atmosphere shifted into absolute panic. Spanish commentator Hugo Savinovic had to dive out of his chair to avoid being crushed. Medical personnel, including Dr. Francois Petit, a chiropractor and martial arts expert employed by the company, rushed to ringside. The emergency medical technicians struggled to navigate a gurney to the wreckage. Foley was loaded onto the stretcher. To everyone watching, the match was definitively over. As they began to wheel him up the aisle, however, a miraculous and terrifying shift occurred. Foley realized that the longer he remained on television, the more engaged the audience became. Despite the agony, he felt he could continue, defying the pleas of medical staff and officials telling him to stop. Foley climbed off the stretcher, covered in bruises and visibly damaged. He smiled a sickening smile and began to climb back up the cell. The crowd erupted into a state of disbelief and awe. Backstage personnel thought he was the most insane individual to ever step foot in the industry. It was the moment that truly solidified him as an indestructible star in the eyes of the public. But the nightmare was far from over. The next sequence pitched by Foley was supposed to be relatively safe. The plan was for The Undertaker to perform a chokeslam on top of the cell, causing the mesh to gradually give way, allowing The Undertaker to stuff Foley down through the hole. However, that is not what happened. When The Undertaker drove Foley into the chain link, the entire panel gave way instantly. Foley plummeted another 15 feet, crashing violently onto the solid, unpadded ring canvas below. As he fell, a heavy steel folding chair that had been on the roof fell with him, striking him directly in the face upon impact. This fall was completely unscripted and far more dangerous than the first. The first fall was a calculated risk. The second was a disastrous accident. Backstage, the panic escalated to absolute terror. Foley lay motionless in the ring. Colette Foley, watching at home with her young children, was furious and terrified, believing her husband had hidden this stunt from her. For the first time in his career, Mick Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. According to the sources mentioned, he was unresponsive for 42 agonizing seconds. Terry Funk and Dr. Petit rushed into the ring, legitimately fearing this might be the end. The Undertaker looked down from the broken roof, instructing Funk to check if Foley was even alive. Funk reported back that he was still breathing. To buy time for the medical staff, Funk orchestrated an impromptu brawl with The Undertaker to distract the audience. Looking back, industry officials admit that the match should have been immediately stopped. However, in that era of wrestling, matches were rarely halted for injuries. Performers simply bought time. As the fog in Foley's brain began to clear, his first sight was Terry Funk's shoes. Realizing he was still in the match, Foley astonishingly tried to stand. He was a complete physical wreck, in a testament to his dedication to television drama. As Foley regained his senses, he realized he had a massive hole underneath his lower lip. To create a memorable visual, he intentionally stuck his tongue through the open wound for the cameras. It was then that viewers noticed something even more grotesque. A tooth was lodged inside Foley's nostril. According to medical personnel, the chair strike had knocked his teeth out and forced one into his throat, which Foley then accidentally inhaled upwards into his nasal passage due to his heavy breathing. The match somehow continued. The pain, the drama, and the concern on everyone's faces were entirely genuine. In a final act of brutality, Foley introduced a bag of sharp steel thumbtacks into the ring. He intentionally rolled around on them to ensure his body was covered in the sharp objects, knowing that the adrenaline would mask the immediate pain. Finally, after 17 grueling minutes, The Undertaker delivered his finishing maneuver and won the match. The aftermath of Hell in a Cell was a mixture of profound relief and severe physical trauma. The 16,000 fans in attendance and the millions watching at home knew they had witnessed something that would never be replicated. Foley had earned their eternal respect. However, the toll on his family was immense. Colette Foley waited anxiously for his post-match phone call. When he finally called, she screamed at him, devastated that their children thought he had died. Backstage, Vince McMahon approached Foley. According to the materials, McMahon thanked Foley for everything he had done for the company, but explicitly demanded that Foley promise never to do anything like that again. Foley was in such a state of shock that he did not even realize the medical staff was actively plucking thumbtacks out of his skin as he spoke. The list of injuries Foley sustained was staggering. He required 15 stitches under his lip, lost 2 teeth, suffered a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, and a bruised kidney that bothered him for 6 weeks. Despite the trauma, the match completely revolutionized his career. Just 6 months after McMahon deemed him unmarketable, Foley became the world champion. However, the bar for violence had been raised to an impossible height. Foley felt a constant, overwhelming pressure to live up to his moniker as the hardcore legend. He felt he owed it to his opponents and the fans to continually deliver unprecedented spectacles. Despite warnings from colleagues that this style would eventually catch up with him, Foley pushed forward. Just 7 months later, Foley pushed his physical limits once again in a brutal I Quit match against The Rock. This match is deeply infamous for its excessive violence and unstopped blood loss. Foley was handcuffed, rendering him completely defenseless. The original plan called for Foley to take 5 unprotected strikes to the head with a steel chair. However, caught up in the intensity of the moment, Foley took a horrifying 11 shots to the cranium. According to his daughter, Noelle Foley, the trauma of watching that event was deeply scarring. It was one of the worst days of Colette Foley's life, as she watched the brutality unfold with her young children. While the wrestling storyline was fiction, the brain damage Foley suffered on television was absolute fact. A normal person could have easily died from 11 full-force blows to the head with a steel chair. Foley's family harbored deep resentment toward that match. Foley later admitted that he chose not to protect himself properly because he wanted the violence to look as real as possible. The long-term consequences of these decisions eventually forced a reckoning. According to the documents, numerous medical professionals warned Foley that if he continued to wrestle, he would end up permanently crippled. Foley tried to delay the inevitable, believing he always had one good match left in him. He wrestled through severe concussions, sometimes driving around completely unable to remember where he lived. Eventually, an independent neurologist delivered a grim verdict. The doctor told Foley that while he could shop around for someone to clear him, the medical reality was that he should never wrestle again. The price of his fame had finally come due. Back in the 1990s, the long-term effects of concussions were not fully understood by the performers. Every major fall in the ring was compared to experiencing a car accident at 25 miles per hour. Today, the wrestling community is acutely aware of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a terrifying degenerative brain disease caused by repetitive trauma. Foley's family lives with the constant anxiety of not knowing how his cognitive health will deteriorate in the next 10 or 20 years. Foley himself admits to being deeply worried about the fallout from his career. However, instead of living in complete fear of the unknown, he chooses to fight it. He actively participates in spoken word tours, performing for audiences to keep his mind sharp through mental gymnastics. The stimulation of a live crowd continues to keep him going. Mick Foley is a man who sacrificed his physical and mental well-being for the roar of the crowd. He acknowledges that his overwhelming desire to be loved and accepted is the very thing responsible for his massive success, as well as his physical decline. For years, Foley harbored resentment toward the Hell in a Cell match because it overshadowed all his other accomplishments, leaving him in a dark place. But a conversation with The Undertaker helped him realize that what they created that night would outlive them both. According to those closest to him, Foley achieved exactly what he set out to do. He created unforgettable moments that put the entire world in awe. During a visit to the World Wrestling Entertainment Archival Warehouse, Foley unexpectedly came across the original cell structure. He touched the rusted metal and, to the shock of his daughter, began to weep. It was a profound realization of how important, life-changing, and terrifying that night truly was. He is incredibly lucky to still be alive. Looking back, Foley reflects that even with the modern understanding of head injuries, he cannot state with absolute certainty that he would have done things differently. He viewed the wrestling ring as a canvas to create surreal, sublime performance art. Despite the severe bumps in the road, he considers it a magical way to make a living. On the nights when the story connected perfectly with the audience, it was one of the most powerful feelings in the world. The dark side of the ring often demands a toll that cannot be refunded. Mick Foley paid that toll in blood, teeth, and years off his physical life. His story remains a testament to the unbelievable resilience of the human body and the deeply complicated psychology of those who risk everything just to hear the crowd roar. Step into the shadows of the squared circle. For decades, I have sat behind the commentary desk, calling the action for the World Wrestling Federation, World Championship Wrestling, Extreme Championship Wrestling, total nonstop action, and all elite wrestling. I have seen the highest of highs and the darkest of lows in professional wrestling. I have watched men become gods and gods crumble into dust. But there are certain nights that leave a permanent scar on the psyche of this industry. Nights where the line between sports entertainment and sheer human survival is shattered. According to the historical archives and the accounts of those who lived it, June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation King of the Ring pay-per-view event, was one of those nights. The match was The Undertaker versus Mankind. The battleground was Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell. The very name hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. Going into that night in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, inside the Civic Arena, everyone knew it was going to be chaotic. But no one, not the fans, not the executives, and certainly not the families of the competitors, knew exactly how far the envelope would be pushed until it plummeted right over the edge. People often say that professional wrestling is a scripted performance. But you cannot script gravity. I've been frightened by a lot of things in this business, but nothing frightened me as much as what unfolded on that summer night. What left fans completely stunned was the unrelenting, horrific punishment that Mick Foley, portraying the character of Mankind, endured. Until you saw it with your own two eyes, you simply did not believe that a human being could physically take that level of abuse and live to tell the tale. The match was real. The pain was agonizingly real. The drama unfolding before 16,000 screaming fans was as real as a heart attack. According to the accounts of those watching backstage, officials and peers were cursing, screaming, and calling Foley a lunatic. Why would a man do this? Why would a husband and a father push himself to the absolute brink of his own mortality? To understand the most infamous match in wrestling history, a match whose legacy persists as both an epic success and a harrowing cautionary tale, we have to understand the mind of the man who survived it. We have to look at the collateral damage. We have to ask the hard questions. When does it stop? When is it enough? Because you pay all day long for the decisions you make in your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but according to the documents and the reflections of his own family, all of us need to ask ourselves the ultimate question: was it worth it? Everyone who gets into professional wrestling is looking for something they find missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the motivation was rooted in a deep, overwhelming need to be liked. Growing up, he was teased. He sought validation. He wanted to hold that championship belt to prove his worth. There is a story from his sophomore year in college that paints a perfect picture of his psychological drive. According to his own recollections, he took a swig of red food coloring and performed a leaping dive off a bed onto a stuffed item resting on a concrete floor. When he hit the floor, he spat out the blood like concoction. The entire dormitory was watching. One girl yelled out that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. But in that moment of disgust, Foley felt power. He realized a fundamental truth about his connection to an audience. If he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them. He just needed to get a reaction. He would eventually become known as the hardcore legend. But the path to that legendary status was paved with broken bones and spilled blood. If you look at a normal Mick Foley match, it is a brutal affair. It involves thumbtacks, fire, barbed wire, taking bumps on bare concrete, and even getting caught in explosions of C4 explosives during his time in Japan. He put his body through unimaginable torment just to hear the crowd gasp. According to his daughter, Noelle Foley, he thrived on getting that visceral, shocking reaction from the audience. Realism was his biggest tool. He once admitted that he did not think he was having a good match unless he had trouble getting back to his hotel room. It was not that he enjoyed the physical pain, but he enjoyed the fact that he could absorb it and sell it in a way that captivated the masses. But behind the monster was a man. Colette Foley, who has known Mick for over 35 years, saw past the scars. When she first met him, she noticed his gentle eyes. He was a nice person with terrible humor and corny jokes, and that is what made her fall in love with him. Their wedding song was Beauty and the Beast. They were a team. She understood his commitment to the business. When the adrenaline was pumping, Foley just wanted people to leave the arena talking about how great the show was, completely at his own risk. That was his drive, and it pushed him to get more reckless along the way. Before he was Mankind, he developed a personality called Cactus Jack. Cactus Jack was wild. He was unhinged. You thought he might genuinely be insane. Jim Cornette, who was working as a producer and agent for the World Wrestling Federation at the time of Hell in a Cell, noted that Foley had undeniable charisma. You could not take your eyes off him. Foley was a master of ring psychology. He knew that fans gravitated toward people who were out of control, people who seemed to go against the script. By doing the unthinkable, he took the audience on a chaotic ride, eliciting the exact response he desired. The attention would be solely on him, and his reputation would only grow. To trace the origins of this madness, you have to look at Foley's early days. His bedroom furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor and a black and white television, connected to a videocassette recorder that barely worked. On that machine, he would watch up to 12 hours of Japanese wrestling tapes a day. He fell in love with the storytelling and the realism. In those matches, it was not just man versus man, it was man versus his environment. He had to defeat his surroundings. Foley believed Japan was where he would make his living. The Japanese promoters were looking for a foreigner who could feud with the legendary Terry Funk. Terry Funk was a master at making people suspend their disbelief. Funk became a mentor to Foley, and together they engaged in explosive, bloody, fiery death matches across Japan. Foley was drawn to the wild style. He believed that crawling on his hands and knees in agony was proof that he had created something special. It was the only way he knew how to stand out. Because of this extreme style, Foley never saw himself as a World Wrestling Federation superstar. At that time, the company was heavily focused on a family-friendly, heavily sanitized product. It was a completely different era, very bland compared to what Foley was doing. According to Al Snow, a former superstar and one of Foley's closest traveling partners, Vince McMahon did not want Mick Foley. McMahon did not think Foley was marketable. He did not think he was physically attractive enough to be a star on television. It was Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations, who convinced McMahon to take a chance. Ross needed fresh opponents for The Undertaker, who was arguably the biggest star in the history of the industry. McMahon kept trying to put giant, lumbering men in the ring with The Undertaker, and the results were dull and boring. Ross knew they did not need another giant. They needed a lunatic. Legend has it that McMahon slammed his hand on a table and agreed to bring Foley in. But under one strict condition, they were going to cover his face. McMahon said they would not acknowledge his past. He was a nobody in McMahon's eyes. Gerald Briscoe, a Hall of Famer, recalled the challenge. The creative team had to build a character out of thin air. That is how they created Mankind. But as Briscoe noted, that bogus character would not have worked with anybody except Mick Foley. Foley fully committed. Without a connection to the audience, a character is meaningless. But fans can sense true commitment. Foley was willing to try anything. As Jim Ross noted, Foley would not turn anything down but the bed covers. The new challenge was simply trying to keep Foley from killing himself. The Undertaker and Mankind laid an incredible foundation. They had 7 pay-per-view matches and 10 television matches. They traveled the globe together. But eventually, Foley felt his character had plateaued. He knew he had to do something drastic to add to their legacy rather than detract from it. For the 1998 King of the Ring event, producers planned to reignite the feud using a recently developed concept, Hell in a Cell. The traditional cage match required a wrestler to escape over the top or through the door. But this cell had a roof. Once you went in, the idea was that only one man was coming out. The first ever Hell in a Cell match had taken place between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. It was a masterpiece. Foley watched that match with his jaw wide open, knowing he could not perform the athletic feats that Michaels could. Now, 9 months later, Foley had to step into that same structure with The Undertaker. Foley went to his mentor, Terry Funk, and asked what they should do. Funk started laughing and jokingly suggested that they start the match on top of the cell, and that Foley should get thrown off. It was meant to be a joke, but Foley looked at him and said he thought he could do it. The idea embedded itself in Foley's mind. He pitched the concept to The Undertaker and Vince McMahon in a casual conversation. According to the accounts, The Undertaker was not on board with throwing Foley off the cell. But Foley was dead set. Eventually, they got McMahon to agree. Foley did not view this match as the second act of his career. He saw it as a desperate attempt to keep his head above water. He genuinely believed that when this run was over, his career would be over too. The Undertaker trusted Foley. If Foley could see it in his head, he could execute it. The pressure mounting on Foley as he walked down the aisle that night must have been suffocating. He knew he had to outdo Shawn Michaels. Jimmy Corderas, a referee and part of the ring crew, was sitting backstage with Gerald Briscoe, watching a bank of monitors. Nobody knew what to anticipate. Nobody could have ever imagined the violence they were about to witness. Even the commentary team, Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, were completely in the dark. Foley wanted to start the match in a way no one ever had. When Mankind's music hit, instead of entering the cell, he began to climb the outside of the structure. The shock swept through the arena. Foley later admitted that despite assuring McMahon and The Undertaker that he was fine with heights, he was actually terrified. As he stood on top of the massive structure in the dark, all he could think about was how to gracefully climb down without ruining his career. Then The Undertaker made his entrance and climbed up to meet him. The match officially began 16 feet in the air. The visual alone created an overwhelming sense of dread. The top section of the cage was held together by zip ties. With 600 pounds of human weight shifting across the mesh, the structure began to give way. The mesh sank by a foot with every step. The chilling sound of zip ties springing loose echoed through the arena. Foley attempted to suplex The Undertaker on the mesh, but The Undertaker cut him off. Realizing there was a very real chance they would both fall straight through, they traded punches, inching dangerously close to the edge of the cell, right above the announce tables. Backstage observers thought it was impossible for Foley to take a fall from that height. The margin for error was virtually zero. Looking down, the announce table looked like a tiny dollhouse. And then it happened. The Undertaker grabbed Mankind and flung a 300-pound human being almost 20 feet through the air. Time seemed to slow down, yet it happened in the blink of an eye. The sound of Foley crashing through the Spanish announce table was deafening. It sounded like a horrific car accident. People in the back exploded in panic. Many legitimately thought Foley was dead. It was a moment that blew the minds of everyone in the industry. The collective gasp of the audience was chilling. For the families watching at home, the horror was indescribable. Colette Foley tried to soothe her two young children by telling them it was fake. But in the back of her mind, she was terrified. The danger was absolute. If The Undertaker had thrown him just slightly too far or too short, Foley would have landed directly on the concrete floor or into the crowd. Miraculously, Foley had visualized the fall in his head. In mid-air, he turned his body to land perfectly flat on the desk, using it to cushion the impact and save his own life. The Spanish commentator, Hugo Savinovic, barely escaped being crushed. Backstage, the environment shifted into a frantic emergency response. Terry Funk was the first to rush the wreckage to check if Foley was conscious. Dr. Francois Petit, the company physician, rushed from the medical room. Foley had fallen heavily on his back and on a dislocated shoulder. The medical team brought out a gurney, but the emergency technicians struggled to maneuver it around the massive steel structure. The Undertaker remained standing on top of the cell. They finally secured Foley onto the stretcher. Everyone thought the match was over. The destruction was complete. But as they wheeled him up the aisle, something shifted in Foley's mind. He realized that the longer he stayed out there, the more engaged the audience became. Despite everyone pleading with him to stop, Foley stood up from the gurney. He pushed through the pain, operating entirely on adrenaline, and began to climb the cell once again. Backstage, producers knew the script had been thrown out the window. Foley was climbing back up to finish what he started. This was the moment that cemented his legacy as a star. The fans were witnessing a man who simply could not be stopped. The next sequence of events was supposed to be relatively safe compared to the first fall. The plan was for The Undertaker to deliver a chokeslam, causing the cage mesh to gradually give way, creating a visual of Foley being stuffed down into the ring. But that is not what happened. When The Undertaker planted Foley into the steel mesh, the panel completely broke open. Foley plummeted straight down, crashing violently onto the solid ring mat. To make matters infinitely worse, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the hole right behind him, striking him directly in the face upon impact. The reaction to this second fall was entirely different. This was not a calculated stunt. This was a catastrophic accident. People backstage were screaming at the monitors. Colette Foley was furiously trying to contact the company, unable to get through to anyone. Seeing her husband lying motionless on the canvas was deeply traumatizing. The ring mat is not soft. It is essentially cement. Foley was knocked unconscious for 42 seconds. The entire arena fell dead silent. The Undertaker looked down from the roof, peering into the ring, visibly terrified for his opponent's life. He told Terry Funk to check if Foley was still breathing. Funk reported back that he was alive. To buy the medical team time, Terry Funk provoked The Undertaker into attacking him, taking the focus away from the lifeless body of Mick Foley. If there was ever a match in the history of professional wrestling that should have been stopped, it was this one. But in that era, matches were not stopped. They simply bought time. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was Terry Funk's shoes. Against all medical logic, Foley managed to stand up. He was a battered, bloodied mess. It remains a controversial point of discussion that officials allowed a man who had just suffered a severe concussion and unconsciousness to continue performing. As the fog in his brain began to clear, Foley's immediate instinct was to create a memorable image for television. He had a massive, gaping wound underneath his lip. He pushed his tongue through the hole in his face and smiled at the camera. During the chaos, it was discovered that the steel chair had knocked out his teeth. Bizarrely, one of those teeth ended up lodged in his nostril. Medical staff speculated that he had inhaled it into his throat and coughed it up through his nasal cavity. The match continued. Foley, completely operating on instinct, called for thumbtacks. He scattered them across the ring and intentionally rolled around in them, ensuring they embedded into his flesh. When adrenaline takes over, the physical pain is masked. The performer pushes themselves beyond the limits of human endurance without even realizing it. Finally, after 17 agonizing minutes, The Undertaker secured the victory. The Pittsburgh crowd of 16,000 went completely insane. They had just witnessed a spectacle of human sacrifice. When the stretcher was brought out a second time, Foley waved it off and walked out under his own power. The audience believed in him because he had risked his very life to entertain them. But the consequences of that night echoed long after the final bell rang. Colette Foley waited in agony for a phone call. Usually, Mick would call immediately after a match to tell her he was safe. On the one night she needed that call the most, the phone remained silent for hours. When he finally called, she screamed at him, devastated that their children thought their father had died on television. The trust she had in him to protect himself was severely damaged. Backstage, Vince McMahon approached Foley at the curtain. McMahon thanked him for everything he had done for the company, but made Foley promise that he would never do anything like that again. Foley was so disoriented that he asked The Undertaker if they had remembered to do the thumbtack spot, completely unaware that doctors were actively pulling tacks out of his body at that very moment. The physical toll was staggering. A dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that lasted for 6 weeks, missing teeth. 15 stitches below his lip, and a severe concussion that was likely never properly treated. Yet, the match sparked a career renaissance for Foley. The man Vince McMahon initially deemed unmarketable became the world champion just 6 months later. But success is a dangerous drug. The bar had been raised to an impossible height. Foley felt a profound obligation to live up to the moniker of the hardcore legend. He believed he owed it to his opponents and to the fans to constantly deliver something they had never seen before. Jim Ross warned him. He told Foley that continuing this violent style would eventually catch up with him. Foley understood the warning, but he refused to agree with it. Just 7 months after Hell in a Cell, Foley pushed his physical limits yet again in a brutal I Quit match against The Rock. The match was designed to be incredibly violent, with no stoppage for excessive blood loss. Foley specifically instructed The Rock to lay in the chair shots. The plan called for a certain number of strikes, but in the heat of the moment, with his hands securely handcuffed behind his back, Foley absorbed a staggering 11 unprotected chair shots directly to his skull. For his family, it was a nightmare. Colette Foley described it as one of the worst days of her life. She was sitting in the front row with their young children. Noelle Foley, reflecting on the trauma, admits she has no actual memories of watching her father wrestle, likely because her brain blocked out the horrific violence. Taking 11 devastating blows to the head is enough to kill a normal person. It was sickening. This brings us back to the ultimate question. Where does it end? In the middle of this scripted fiction, Foley suffered legitimate brain damage for a television storyline. He understood that his chosen style would result in great discomfort, often choosing the more painful route simply because it looked better on camera. The medical community eventually intervened. Independent neurologists reviewed his case and delivered a chilling verdict. He should never wrestle again. Today, we know far more about the long-term effects of repetitive brain trauma and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Every impact in the ring is likened to a 25-mile-per-hour car crash. Foley suffered concussion upon concussion. He paid an enormous physical and mental price for his fame. There were days when he would drive his car and forget where he lived. The fear of the unknown haunts his family. CTE is a terrifying disease, and no one knows what his cognitive function will look like in 10 or 20 years. It is a daily worry for his daughter. But despite the dark reality of his medical future, Mick Foley refuses to live in fear. He fights back. He travels the world doing spoken word shows, using the performance as mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp. The roar of the crowd, the stimulation of the audience, it keeps him alive. For a long time, Foley harbored resentment toward the Hell in a Cell match. He felt it overshadowed everything else he had accomplished in his career, reducing him to a single night of extreme violence. He went through a dark period where he felt he had accomplished nothing at all. But a conversation with The Undertaker changed his perspective. The Undertaker told him that what they created that night in Pittsburgh would outlive them both. That realization allowed Foley to embrace his legacy. He sacrificed his body for the roar of the crowd, a roar that he admits was entirely responsible for his success. There is a poignant moment captured on film when Mick and Noelle Foley visited the company's warehouse. Walking through the aisles of wrestling history, they stumbled upon the original cell structure. Foley reached out, touched the rusted steel, and began to cry. It was a profound release of emotion. For a man who built a career on masking his pain, the tears revealed the immense gravity of what he had survived. Looking back at the carnage, the blood, the zip ties, the broken tables, and the missing teeth, we are left to ponder the nature of performance art. Foley viewed the wrestling ring as a canvas to create a surreal, sublime experience. He sought love and acceptance from total strangers, and he paid for it with his own flesh and memory. Was it worth it? According to the legend himself, despite the severe risks and the heavy toll, there were nights when everything clicked perfectly, providing one of the most powerful feelings in the world. Hell in a Cell stands as a monument to human endurance, a terrifying testament to a man who refused to stay down. It is a story of sacrifice, survival, and the dark, undeniable magnetism of professional wrestling. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the archives. Until next time, keep your eyes on the ring and remember the human cost behind the spectacle. Ladies and gentlemen, step into the shadows of the squared circle. What you are about to explore is not merely a recap of a sporting event, but a deep psychological examination of human endurance, the thirst for validation, and the devastating collateral damage that comes when the line between entertainment and terrifying reality is completely obliterated. We are looking back at a single night that forever changed the landscape of professional wrestling. The date was June 28, 1998. The event was the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view. On this night, one specific matchup would carve out its place as arguably the most shocking and visceral spectacle in the history of the industry. The Undertaker versus Mankind, locked inside the unforgiving steel confines of Hell in a Cell. When we talk about Hell in a Cell, we are talking about a concept that hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. According to the veterans of the industry who were there that night, everyone knew the match was going to be intense, but absolutely no one anticipated the level of sheer madness that would unfold. You had two incredibly dedicated talents out there who made it their mission to push the envelope of sports entertainment until it completely toppled over the edge. As the old industry adage goes, professional wrestling may be predetermined, but you absolutely cannot fake gravity. Seasoned analysts and commentators who have witnessed decades of ring action will tell you that they have been frightened by many things in this business. But nothing frightened them quite as much as the events of that night in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What left fans and colleagues utterly stunned was the unrelenting, inhumane punishment that Mick Foley, portraying the character of Mankind, was willing to endure. Observers have noted that until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply would not believe that a human being could physically subject themselves to such trauma and live to tell the tale. The pain on display was real. The drama was palpable. Backstage, agents and producers were screaming, cursing, and questioning why a man would willingly put his life on the line for a singular performance. This brings us to the ultimate question that echoes through the annals of wrestling history. Why do it? Today, the legacy of that Hell in a Cell match persists as a paradox. It is simultaneously an epic, monumental success that cemented a legacy and a grim, cautionary tale. According to those who watched from the backstage monitors, the company dodged several lethal bullets that day. Looking back, it is truly staggering to consider that the officials allowed a performer to lose consciousness, awaken, and simply continue the match. The collateral damage that ensued from that decision is an entirely different, darker story. When does the pursuit of greatness stop? When is the sacrifice enough? The reality of this business is that a performer pays all day long for the rest of their natural life, for the decisions they make during their 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was, without a doubt, a dangerously crazy masterpiece. But every fan, every executive, and every wrestler must ask themselves, was the human cost truly worth it? To understand the madness of that night, we must analyze the complex psychology of the man behind the Mankind mask, Mick Foley. According to psychological analyses of performers, everyone who gets into the wrestling business is searching for something they find missing in their own personal lives. By his own admission, Mick Foley was teased relentlessly in his youth, which fostered an overwhelming, insatiable need to be liked and accepted by the masses. He wanted to capture the ultimate prize, the World Wrestling Federation Championship belt, to validate his existence. There is a legendary story from Foley's sophomore year in college that perfectly encapsulates his mindset. In front of a dormitory crowd, Foley took a swig of red food coloring and executed a high-flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a stuffed animal resting on a solid concrete floor. Upon impact, he spat the fake blood concoction into the air. While most would be horrified, Foley heard a girl in the room scream that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. In that exact moment, he did not feel embarrassment. He felt absolute power. His philosophy became clear: if he could not make people naturally love him, perhaps he could captivate them by disgusting them. He needed to elicit a reaction, no matter the physical cost. This young man would eventually morph into the hardcore legend, the man who survived hell in a cell. Today, many younger fans are introduced to the industry through the footage of this very match. It serves as a gateway. New viewers often ask if every professional wrestling match is that extreme, and the definitive answer is no. But a standard Mick Foley match was never normal. His bouts were characterized by hardcore brutality, often featuring blood, thumbtacks, and fire. Over the course of his international career, Foley subjected his body to unimaginable horrors. According to historical records of his time in Japan, he wrestled in death matches where he was engulfed in flames, thrown into barbed wire, and even caught in explosions rigged with composition for explosives. He took devastating falls directly onto exposed concrete. The physical toll was unprecedented. To the audience, he was a gladiator, but behind the curtain, he was a family man. His daughter, Noelle Foley, has spoken about how her father simply loved getting a shocked reaction from the crowd, thriving on the gasps of horror. Realism was Foley's greatest tool. He genuinely believed that he did not have a good match unless he physically struggled to walk back to his hotel room afterward. Interestingly, Foley did not inherently enjoy feeling pain. Rather, he enjoyed the fact that he possessed the superhuman endurance to absorb that pain and present it to the audience in a way that was highly entertaining. This extreme commitment created a profound conflict at home. Colette Foley, who has known Mick for over 35 years, fell in love with a gentle, kind-hearted man known for his terrible, corny humor. Their wedding song was appropriately Beauty and the Beast. Colette understood his intense commitment to his craft. She knew that when the adrenaline pumped through his veins, his sole desire was to ensure the fans left the arena talking about how incredible the show was, completely disregarding his own safety. This drive pushed him to become increasingly reckless. Before becoming Mankind, Foley developed a wildly unhinged persona known as Cactus Jack. Cactus Jack was a character that made audiences genuinely question the performer's sanity. Jim Cornette, a legendary manager and former agent for the World Wrestling Federation, noted that Foley possessed an undeniable charisma. You simply could not take your eyes off him because he was entirely unorthodox. Foley was a master of in-ring psychology. He understood that audiences craved characters who appeared to be completely out of control, individuals who seemed to be going off the scripted path. By engaging in erratic behavior, like biting opponents or taking catastrophic falls, he took the fans on an emotional roller coaster, ensuring the spotlight remained firmly fixed on him. Foley's education in the art of violence was self-taught and rigorous. Early in his marriage, his bedroom furniture consisted merely of a mattress on the floor and a black and white television connected to a videocassette recorder that barely functioned. On that machine, Foley would sometimes study Japanese wrestling tapes for up to 12 hours a single day. He was captivated by the realism and the environmental storytelling of the Japanese style, where a wrestler had to defeat not only their opponent, but the hazardous surroundings as well. For a long time, Foley believed his destiny lied in Japan. The Japanese promoters were actively searching for a rugged foreigner to feud with the legendary Terry Funk. Terry Funk is widely regarded by industry historians as one of the greatest of all time, specifically for his unparalleled ability to make an audience suspend their disbelief instantly. Funk became a mentor to Foley, and together they orchestrated a series of explosive, bloody, and fiery death matches across Japan. Foley was naturally drawn to this extreme style, often finding himself crawling on his hands and knees in the aftermath, viewing the agony as tangible proof that he had created something truly special. Because of his unorthodox look and violent style, Foley never envisioned himself as a star for the World Wrestling Federation. At that specific time, the company was operating under a highly sanitized, family-friendly era. The product was clean and arguably bland. Foley's brutal aesthetic did not align with the corporate image. Al Snow, a former superstar and one of Foley's closest traveling companions, confirmed that the chairman, Mr. McMahon, initially had zero interest in hiring Foley. McMahon did not believe Foley was marketable or visually appealing for television. It took the persistent lobbying of Jim Ross, who was serving as the vice president of talent relations at the time, to convince the chairman. Ross implored McMahon to trust his eye for talent. The company desperately needed compelling challengers for their marquee attraction, The Undertaker. Historically, the company had fed a repetitive string of slow, plodding giants to The Undertaker, resulting in dull, uninspired television. Ross recognized that what The Undertaker truly needed was an unpredictable lunatic. According to backstage lore, McMahon finally slammed his hand on a desk and agreed to hire Foley. But with one strict condition: they were going to cover Foley's face with a leather mask because McMahon did not want the audience to see him. McMahon viewed Foley as an absolute nobody. From this corporate rejection, the character of Mankind was born. Hall of Famer Jerry Briscoe recalled the immense challenge of building a character out of someone the boss fundamentally did not believe in. The concept of a tortured, mask-wearing schizophrenic could have been a spectacular failure. Yet, this bizarre persona worked exclusively because of Mick Foley's absolute dedication. Foley understood that without a genuine emotional connection to the audience, the character work was meaningless. Fans possess a sixth sense for authenticity. They can feel a performer's commitment. Ross's ultimate goal was to mold Foley into the perfect rival for The Undertaker. Foley, true to his nature, was willing to try absolutely anything to succeed. The new, terrifying challenge for the company's agents was finding a way to prevent Foley from accidentally killing himself in the ring. The rivalry between Mankind and The Undertaker became the bedrock of the company's programming. They waged war across 7 pay-per-view events and 10 television matches, traveling the globe together. However, by the summer of 1998, Foley felt his character had hit a plateau. He believed he needed to do something monumental to add to their shared legacy, rather than let it slowly fade. The stage was set for the King of the Ring. The booking committee decided to reignite the feud using a recently introduced diabolical structure, Hell in a Cell. Traditionally, steel cage matches ended when a competitor escaped over the top or through the door. But this concept was different. The cell featured a solid steel mesh roof. 2 men would enter, and theoretically, only one would leave. The inaugural Hell in a Cell match had taken place months prior between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, and it was hailed as a cinematic, violent masterpiece. Foley studied that first match in awe, realizing he possessed none of the athletic agility that Michaels displayed. He knew he had to rely on something else to make an impact. Seeking advice, Foley turned to his mentor, Terry Funk. During a brainstorming session, Funk jokingly suggested that they should start the match on the actual roof of the cage, and then Foley could get thrown off. It was meant as a dark piece of humor, but the laughter quickly died in the room. Foley looked at Funk with dead seriousness and stated that he believed he could actually survive that fall. From that moment, the idea became a dangerous obsession. Foley carefully pitched the concept to The Undertaker and Mr. McMahon, casually dropping the idea of being thrown off the roof into the conversation. The Undertaker was highly skeptical and hesitant to throw a man from that height, but Foley was completely dead set on the stunt. Foley viewed this extreme measure not as a glorious second act for his career, but simply as a desperate attempt to keep his head above water in a cutthroat industry. He fully believed that once this specific run was over, his career would be finished. He mapped out the trajectory in his mind, and The Undertaker, trusting Foley's judgment, reluctantly agreed. As the broadcast began, commentators Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler hyped the match as an unprecedented spectacle, warning the television audience that the loser might bypass the local hospital and go straight to the morgue. The atmosphere inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena was electric, with 16,000 rabid fans packed into the stands. Backstage, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Jimmy Corderas, a referee and ring crew member, watched the monitors alongside producer Jerry Briscoe, noting that nobody truly knew what to anticipate. When the combatants made their entrances, Foley shocked the world by bypassing the cell door and immediately scaling the steel wall to the roof. Inside the arena, confusion reigned. The fans, the commentators, and even the officials were bewildered. Foley had assured management that he was comfortable on top of the structure, but according to his own later admissions, he was absolutely terrified of heights. As The Undertaker's iconic, mournful entrance music echoed through the arena, Foley stood on the steel mesh, secretly wondering how he could gracefully climb back down without ruining his professional reputation. The Undertaker followed him up. The match had officially begun 20 feet in the air. Immediately, a severe structural flaw revealed itself. The chain-link mesh on the roof was secured merely by plastic zip ties, with nearly 600 pounds of human mass stepping on it. The mesh began to buckle and sink by roughly a foot with every step. The terrifying sound of plastic zip ties violently snapping echoed over the crowd noise. Foley attempted a suplex on the roof, but The Undertaker wisely blocked it. Realizing the very real danger that they could both plunge straight through the fragile ceiling to the ring below, the brawling carefully moved toward the edge of the structure, directly above the Spanish announce desk. Backstage observers held their breath, praying they would step back from the precipice. From the roof, the announce table looked incredibly small, like a piece of dollhouse furniture. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. Then the unthinkable happened. The Undertaker grabbed Mankind, lifted him, and hurled the 300-pound man off the edge of the cell. For those watching, time seemed to stand completely still, yet it was over in the blink of an eye. Foley plummeted through the air, violently crashing through the wooden announce table, sending monitors and debris flying. The sound of the impact was horrifying. It sounded like a horrific automobile accident. A collective, audible gasp of pure terror washed over the arena. Backstage, agents and wrestlers exploded in panic. Many legitimately believed they had just witnessed a man die on live television. Foley's wife, Colette, was watching at home with their 2 young children. To shield her kids from the trauma, she desperately repeated that it was all fake, though internally, she was in a state of absolute panic. It was a stunt that possessed severe, life-threatening consequences. Had The Undertaker thrown him just a fraction of an inch too far or too short, Foley would have impacted directly on the solid concrete arena floor, which could have been instantly fatal. Miraculously, Foley had planned his trajectory in his mind. Mid-air, he contorted his massive frame to land as flatly as possible on the table, allowing the wood to cushion the blow and save his life. Chaos erupted ringside. The Spanish commentator, Hugo Savinovic, barely bailed out of his chair in time. First responders, officials, and Terry Funk rushed the debris field. The company's physician, Dr. Francois Petit, sprinted from the medical room to the carnage. Dr. Petit discovered that Foley had taken a devastating impact to his back and severely dislocated his shoulder. Emergency medical technicians arrived with a gurney, struggling to navigate it through the debris and the lowered cell structure. Foley was strapped down. The match appeared to be completely over. The 16,000 fans watched in stunned silence as the broken performer was wheeled up the entrance ramp. But then, Foley's mind began to process the crowd's reaction. He realized that the longer he stayed on the gurney, the more deeply the audience was emotionally invested. Defying all logic, medical advice, and basic self-preservation, Foley rolled off the gurney. A twisted smile stretched across his face. To the utter disbelief of his peers, the commentators, and the medical staff, he began marching back toward the cell. People screamed at him to stop, telling him the match was over, but Foley was a man possessed. He began to climb the cell wall a second time. Backstage veterans could not comprehend how his battered body was physically capable of making the ascent. But Foley had made a pledge to himself to deliver a masterpiece, and he was determined to see it through. He reached the roof, and the brawl resumed. What happened next was not part of any script. It was a terrifying accident that nearly ended Mick Foley's life. The original plan called for The Undertaker to execute a choke slam on the roof, which would cause the mesh to safely sag, creating a visually dramatic moment. However, when The Undertaker grabbed Foley by the throat and drove him backward, the remaining zip ties completely failed. The steel panel completely gave way. Foley plummeted through the roof, dropping 20 feet in a terrifying freefall, crashing violently against the ring canvas. The ring mat is not a soft cushion. It is heavy canvas stretched tightly over wooden planks and solid steel beams, reinforced by a concrete foundation underneath. It was akin to falling directly onto cement. To make matters infinitely worse, a heavy steel folding chair that had been resting on the roof fell through the hole directly behind Foley, striking him violently in the face upon impact. This was not a planned stunt. Backstage, panic reached a fever pitch. Vince McMahon and the executives tried frantically to communicate with the officials at ringside, but the communication lines were jammed. In the ring, Foley lay completely motionless. For the very first time in his illustrious career, the hardcore legend had been legitimately knocked unconscious. The cage doors were opened, and personnel flooded the ring. Dr. Petit and Terry Funk rushed to Foley's side. The Undertaker, looking down through the hole in the roof, broke character completely and told Funk to check if Foley was still breathing. Funk checked his pulse and reported back that he was alive. Foley remained entirely unresponsive for an agonizing 42 seconds. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Terry Funk, in a brilliant display of improvisation, attacked The Undertaker to buy precious time and draw the television cameras away from the medical emergency unfolding on the canvas. According to modern protocols, the match should have been stopped immediately. But in that era of professional wrestling, matches were rarely halted. The performers simply bought time. Slowly, Foley began to regain consciousness. The first thing his blurred vision registered were the shoes of Terry Funk. Relying entirely on muscle memory and sheer willpower, Foley somehow managed to stand up. His face was a mask of crimson. The steel chair had knocked 2 of his teeth out. Grotesquely, one of the dislodged teeth had somehow been forced through his nasal passage, lodging itself visibly inside his nostril. He also suffered a massive, gaping wound below his lower lip. Ever the showman, even while severely concussed, Foley intentionally pushed his tongue through the open wound for the cameras, creating one of the most haunting and iconic visuals in television broadcast history. The level of punishment was incomprehensible, yet Foley was not finished. He signaled to bring out a bag of thumbtacks, scattering thousands of the sharp metal pins across the canvas. In the final, brutal sequence of the match, Foley was driven violently into the bed of thumbtacks. According to those who know him best, when the adrenaline completely takes over, the performer no longer registers the pain, they become one with it. Finally, after 17 minutes of unparalleled carnage, The Undertaker secured the victory. The aftermath was a scene of awe and horror. The 16,000 fans in the arena had witnessed a genuine spectacle of human endurance. The broadcast concluded, but the real-life consequences were just beginning. At home, Colette Foley was terrified. Her husband routinely called her immediately after his matches to confirm his safety. On the night of his most dangerous stunt, the phone did not ring for hours. The delay bred deep anxiety and anger. When Foley finally did call, Colette screamed at him, revealing that his children legitimately thought they had watched their father die on television. Before Hell in a Cell, Colette had trusted that her husband would not jeopardize his family. After that night, his well-being became a constant, looming concern. Backstage, Foley was greeted at the curtain by a stunned Vince McMahon. The chairman looked at the mangled performer, thanked him for his profound sacrifice to the company, and sternly demanded that Foley promise never to do anything like that ever again. In a dark, humorous moment that highlighted his severe concussion, Foley turned to The Undertaker and asked if they had remembered to do the sequence with the thumbtacks, completely oblivious to the fact that Dr. Petit was actively plucking dozens of the tacks out of his bleeding back at that very moment. The medical report was extensive. Foley suffered a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks, missing teeth, 15 stitches in his face, and a severe concussion. Yet, despite the catastrophic injuries, the match sparked a massive career renaissance. 6 months later, the man Vince McMahon once viewed as entirely unmarketable was crowned the World Wrestling Federation champion. However, the bar for violence had been irreparably raised. Foley felt immense pressure to live up to his moniker as the hardcore legend. Just 7 months later, he engaged in the infamous "I Quit" match against Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The original script called for Foley to take 5 unprotected steel chair shots to the head while handcuffed. In the heat of the moment, the sequence devolved into sheer brutality, and Foley ultimately absorbed 11 sickening, unprotected chair shots to the skull. There was no medical stoppage for excessive blood loss. His young children were seated in the front row, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to distinguish the scripted entertainment from the factual reality that their father was suffering legitimate brain trauma for a television storyline. Noelle Foley later recounted that she possesses 0 childhood memories of her father wrestling, a psychological block likely built by the profound trauma of witnessing those events. The consequences of pushing the physical limits of the human body are inevitable. According to medical professionals, repeated concussions yield effects akin to surviving multiple 25-mile-per-hour car collisions. Foley was explicitly warned by independent neurologists to never wrestle again, but the addiction to the roar of the crowd was too powerful. He continued to compete, delaying the inevitable physical decline. Today, Foley pays a heavy price for his fame. According to those close to him, there were periods where he would drive his car and forget how to get to his own home due to the compounding effects of concussions. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, is a terrifying specter that looms over his future. The long-term effects of brain trauma mean his family lives with constant, daily anxiety about his cognitive health 10 or 20 years down the line. Yet, Mick Foley continues to fight. He exercises his mind through spoken-word tours, finding the audience stimulation he desperately craves without the physical trauma. For a time, he harbored deep resentment toward the Hell in a Cell match, feeling that it overshadowed his entire body of work and reduced his career to a single night of violence. But a poignant conversation with The Undertaker helped him find peace. The Undertaker reminded him that what they created that night in Pittsburgh will outlive them both. During a visit to a company warehouse, Foley came face-to-face with the original steel cell. In a rare display of vulnerability, the hardcore legend touched the rusted steel and began to weep. It was a profound realization of the magnitude of his sacrifice, the terror of how close he came to losing everything, and the undeniable permanence of his legacy. Mick Foley admits that while we now possess a vastly superior medical understanding of head injuries, he cannot definitively state that he would have altered his path. The squared circle was his canvas, and upon it, he created a form of performance art that was both sublime and horrifying. Through the agony and the sacrifice, he achieved the one thing he always desperately sought: the eternal, roaring acceptance of the audience. It was a magical, dangerous way to make a living, and for better or worse, the echoes of that June night in 1998 will resonate through the halls of wrestling history until the end of time. Ladies and gentlemen, fans of the Squared Circle, step into the shadows of professional wrestling history with me. We are about to look back at a night that forever altered the physical and psychological landscape of sports entertainment. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation King of the Ring pay-per-view event. One single match would earn its permanent place as one of the most shocking, terrifying, and widely discussed spectacles in the history of the industry. The combatants were two absolute legends, The Undertaker and Mankind. The battleground was the unforgiving steel structure known as Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. Going into that night, the world knew it was going to be intense, but no one, from the fans in the arena to the executives behind the curtain, truly knew it was going to be that extreme. You had two immensely talented performers out there who liked to push the envelope until it teetered dangerously over the edge. People outside our business often say that professional wrestling is entirely simulated. But let me tell you something, you cannot fake gravity. Throughout my years of calling matches, I have been frightened by a lot of things in this industry, but absolutely nothing frightened me as much as that match did. What left fans completely stunned was the unrelenting, horrifying punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind the Mankind mask, endured. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply did not believe that a human being could physically absorb that level of trauma and continue to live. That match was real. The pain was real. The drama was profoundly real. Sitting at the commentary desk, observers were cursing, screaming, and questioning why any performer would willingly subject themselves to such peril. Why do this? Why cross that line? Today, this infamous matchup's legacy persists as both an epic success of storytelling and a dark cautionary tale. According to the accounts of those involved, the industry dodged multiple fatal bullets that day. When we analyze the backstage mechanics and the on-screen product, it is truly crazy to think that officials would allow someone to lose consciousness and then simply continue the bout. The collateral damage that ensued from these decisions is a completely different chapter. It forces us to ask the hard questions. When does it stop? When is the sacrifice enough? Performers pay all day long for the rest of their natural lives, for the decisions they make during their 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but every single one of us needs to ask ourselves the ultimate question, was it worth it? To understand the events of June 28, 1998, we must first analyze the psychology of Mick Foley. Everyone who gets into professional wrestling is looking for something they find missing in their own personal lives. According to Foley himself, he was teased heavily in his youth, which birthed an overwhelming, almost desperate need to be liked by others. He wanted to hold that World Wrestling Federation Championship belt to prove his worth. There is a defining story from his sophomore year of college that perfectly illustrates his psychological drive. Mick took a drink of red food coloring and executed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a stuffed dummy resting on a hard concrete floor. When he hit the floor, he spit that blood concoction out for everyone in the dormitory to see. When one of the observing girls shouted that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, Foley did not feel shame. He felt power. He realized that if he could not make people naturally love him, perhaps he could captivate them by disgusting them. He simply needed to get reactions. Foley would eventually become known globally as the hardcore legend. But the road to surviving Hell in a Cell was paved with years of extraordinary physical sacrifice. Many modern fans point to the Hell in a Cell match as their perfect gateway into wrestling. But a normal Mick Foley match is quite brutal in its own right. According to historical documents and footage, his early career featured thumbtacks, fire, barbed wire, and even military-grade explosives during his tours in Japan. He was getting speared through flaming tables and taking punishing falls directly onto raw concrete. He put his body through an unimaginable amount of trauma just to hear the roar of the crowd. His family, including his daughter Noelle Foley, has noted that he truly loved eliciting an extreme reaction from the audience. Realism was his biggest tool. Mick Foley did not believe he was having a successful match unless he had physical trouble walking back to his hotel room. According to his own reflections, he did not necessarily enjoy the pain itself, but he deeply enjoyed the fact that he could absorb it and project it into a compelling story. His wife, Colette Foley, who has known Mick for over 35 years, faced the heavy burden of watching her husband risk his life. When she first met him, she saw a gentle, kind person with a terrible sense of humor. They walked down the aisle to the theme of Beauty and the Beast. They were a team, and she understood his commitment to his craft. When his adrenaline was pumping, Foley just wanted people to leave the arena talking about how great the show was, completely at his own physical risk. That internal drive pushed him to become increasingly extreme. To understand how he reached the top of that cell, we have to look at the evolution of his characters. He developed a persona called Cactus Jack, a wild and seemingly unhinged individual. He had undeniable charisma. You could not take your eyes off him because he was so entirely different from the polished athletes of that era. Jim Cornette, who was working as a producer and agent for the World Wrestling Federation at the time, recognized that Foley was a master of ring psychology. Mick knew the fans gravitated toward performers who appeared completely out of control, biting opponents and going completely off the established script. He could take the audience on an emotional ride, and his reputation grew rapidly. During his early career, Foley and his wife lived humbly. Their bedroom furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor and a black and white television with a barely functional videocassette recorder. Foley would spend up to 12 hours a day studying Japanese wrestling tapes. He was drawn to the realism and the intense storytelling, where a wrestler did not just have to defeat their opponent, but also their physical surroundings. He genuinely thought Japan would be where he made his permanent living. In Japan, promoters were looking for a foreign talent to feud with the legendary Terry Funk. Terry Funk was widely considered one of the absolute greatest of all time for his unique ability to make audiences suspend their disbelief in a matter of seconds. Funk became a vital mentor to Mick Foley, and the two began working together in incredibly explosive, bloody, and violent matches. Foley was always drawn to the wild aspects of the business. If he left a match crawling on his hands and knees, he considered it proof that he had accomplished something special. Because of this brutal style, Foley never originally saw himself fitting into the World Wrestling Federation. At that time, the promotion was firmly anchored in a general audience-rated era. It was a highly sanitized environment, and Foley's gritty style simply did not gel with what the company was selling. Al Snow, a former superstar and Foley's close travel partner, confirmed that Chairman Vince McMahon initially had zero interest in hiring Mick. McMahon did not think Foley was marketable and did not find his appearance appealing for television. It took the persistence of Jim Ross, who was the vice president of talent relations at the time, to convince McMahon to take a chance. The roster desperately needed fresh, unpredictable opponents for their top-tier stars, specifically The Undertaker. For a long time, management kept feeding giant, lumbering athletes to The Undertaker, which often resulted in dull and boring television. The Undertaker needed a lunatic. When McMahon finally agreed to bring Foley in, he famously slammed his hand on a table and demanded that Foley's face be completely covered. McMahon believed Foley was a nobody, and so the executives were tasked with building a compelling character entirely from scratch. This led to the birth of Mankind. According to Hall of Famer Gerald Briscoe, creating a gimmick out of thin air would have failed with almost anyone else in the industry. But Foley made it work. He pulled his own hair out, screamed in the boiler rooms, and fully committed to the madness. Without a genuine connection to the audience, any character is meaningless, and the fans could instantly sense Foley's absolute dedication. The primary goal was for Mankind to be the perfect foil for The Undertaker. Foley was willing to try absolutely anything to succeed. The challenge for the management team quickly shifted from trying to get him over with the crowd to desperately trying to keep him from killing himself in the ring. Mankind and The Undertaker laid an incredible foundation together, wrestling across the globe in 7 major pay-per-view events and 10 television broadcasts. However, as 1998 rolled around, Foley felt his character had reached a plateau. He knew he had to do something drastic to add to their legacy rather than detract from it. For the King of the Ring event, producers planned to reignite the feud using the recently developed Hell in a Cell concept. Traditionally, cage matches in the promotion ended when a competitor climbed over the top or escaped through a door. The Hell in a Cell was different. It featured a steel roof. 2 men would enter, and only one would leave. The first ever Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels was a historic success, setting an impossibly high standard. Foley openly admitted that he watched that first match with an open jaw, realizing he could not athletically perform the maneuvers Michaels and Undertaker did. Foley needed an edge. He sought advice from his mentor, Terry Funk. According to the accounts of those involved, Funk started laughing and jokingly suggested that Foley should start the match on top of the cell and get thrown off. What was meant as a passing joke lodged itself deep into Foley's brain. He stopped laughing, looked at Funk, and declared that he could actually do it. Foley pitched the dangerous idea to The Undertaker and Mr. McMahon, framing it as a casual, manageable stunt. The Undertaker was extremely hesitant and was not on board with throwing a man off a structure that high. But Foley was dead set on the idea, eventually talking his opponent into it. Foley viewed this dangerous stunt not as the start of a new chapter in his career, but simply as a desperate attempt to keep his head above water. He genuinely believed his career was nearing its absolute end. The Undertaker trusted Foley. If Foley could visualize it, he believed he could execute it. The anticipation for the match was massive. Everyone knew the loser might bypass the local hospital and go straight to the morgue. There is an old saying, "Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it." On June 28th at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, 16,000 fans eagerly awaited the showdown. The pressure on Foley was immense. Referee Jimmy Corderas and producer Gerald Briscoe were closely monitoring the situation from the backstage guerrilla position. No one could have ever imagined the terrifying spectacle they were about to witness. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were at the commentary desk, completely in the dark regarding Foley's secret plans. When Mankind's music hit, he did not enter the cage. He immediately began climbing the outer mesh to the roof. There was visible shock across the arena. Foley later confessed that despite assuring McMahon and The Undertaker that he was comfortable with heights, he was actually terrified once he reached the summit. The entire time The Undertaker made his long, imposing entrance, Foley was silently agonizing over how he could gracefully climb back down without ruining his professional reputation. But he stayed on the roof, daring The Undertaker to join him. The match officially began 20 feet in the air. This immediately created a profound psychological fear. The top section of the cage was secured only with plastic zip ties. When a combined 600 pounds of human weight stepped onto the mesh, it visibly gave way by about a foot. The sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. Foley attempted to execute a maneuver, but The Undertaker wisely cut it off, realizing there was a very real chance the entire roof would collapse under them. They moved toward the edge of the cell, directly above the Spanish announce table. From 20 feet in the air, that table looked like a tiny piece of dollhouse furniture. There was zero margin for error. If The Undertaker threw him too far or too short, Foley would hit solid concrete, or worse, crash into the paying audience. Then it happened. A 300-pound man was flung from the heavens. Time seemed to slow down, yet it happened in the blink of an eye. The crash was sickening. The sound of Foley destroying the announcer table was absolutely terrifying. Backstage, the locker room exploded in pure concern. It was exactly like witnessing a horrific car accident. Many people watching genuinely believed he was dead. In an industry built on controlled risks, nobody had ever attempted something of this magnitude. Foley's wife, watching at home with their 2 young children, frantically tried to soothe them by saying it was all fake, while secretly panicking in her own mind. The stunt was believable because the danger was undeniable. Remarkably, Foley had visualized the fall perfectly. In midair, he rotated his body just enough to land flat on the desk, allowing the structure to cushion his fall and ultimately save his life. The Spanish commentator, Hugo Savinovic, barely escaped being crushed. Terry Funk was the very first person to reach Foley's lifeless body, desperately checking to see if his friend was still conscious. Dr. Francois Petit rushed from the medical room, completely shocked by the unprecedented emergency. Emergency medical technicians flooded the ringside area. They struggled to get a gurney through the debris, forcing the production crew to physically raise the cell structure while the Undertaker remained standing on the roof. Foley was strapped to the stretcher. Everyone in the building, and everyone watching on television, believed the match was rightfully over. But as they wheeled him up the aisle, a smile crept across Foley's face. The longer he stayed on that stretcher, the more he realized the audience was completely captivated. Defying all logic, medical advice, and common sense, Foley rolled off the gurney. Officials pleaded with him to stop, but he began climbing the cell a second time. The crowd erupted. It was a moment that permanently transformed him into a legitimate superstar. Backstage, producers held their breath, knowing that the scripted storyline still had more to unfold. But what happened next was not part of any script. The original plan called for a single choke slam on the roof, which would cause the steel mesh to gradually give way, creating a powerful visual of The Undertaker stuffing Foley through the ceiling. But the structural integrity of the cage had already been fatally compromised. When The Undertaker delivered the chokeslam, the cage broke entirely. Foley plummeted straight through the roof, plummeting toward the solid ring canvas. It was a completely different, uncontrolled fall. Backstage, observers screamed at the monitors. This was the moment where pure terror set in. Foley hit the mat with devastating force. The ring floor is essentially concrete with minimal padding. Adding to the horror, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the broken roof and crashed directly onto Foley's face. For the first time in his entire career, Mick Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. He lay completely motionless in the center of the ring. A second flood of officials, including Dr. Petit and Terry Funk, rushed into the cage. Foley was unresponsive. The Undertaker looked down from the broken roof and told Funk to see if Foley was even still alive. Foley remained unconscious for 42 agonizing seconds. To buy the medical staff crucial time, Terry Funk ad-libbed a sequence, antagonizing The Undertaker to draw the focus away from the injured Foley. According to wrestling historians and the officials present, this was the exact moment the match absolutely should have been stopped. But in that era of professional wrestling, matches were rarely halted. Performers bought time instead. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was Terry Funk's shoes. Disoriented and severely concussed, Foley remarkably managed to stand up. How his body allowed him to do so remains a medical mystery. As the fog in his brain began to clear, Foley's immediate instinct was to create a memorable image for television. He had a massive, gaping wound underneath his lip. He pushed his own tongue through the hole in his face and smiled for the cameras. Adding to the grotesque visual, one of his front teeth had been knocked out by the falling chair and had somehow lodged itself inside his nasal passage. The match continued. The pain, the drama, and the profound concern on the faces of everyone involved were completely real. Foley, functioning purely on adrenaline, demanded that they introduce thumbtacks into the ring. He purposely rolled his battered body through thousands of steel tacks, ensuring they embedded deeply into his skin. Finally, after 17 grueling minutes, The Undertaker mercifully ended the contest. The aftermath was sobering. Vince McMahon met Foley behind the curtain. While the chairman thanked Foley for his incredible sacrifice to the company, he firmly demanded that Foley promise never to do anything like that ever again. As doctors painfully plucked thumbtacks from his flesh, Foley was so concussed he had to ask The Undertaker if they had even used the thumbtacks at all. The physical toll was staggering. Foley required 15 stitches under his lip, lost 2 teeth, suffered a badly bruised kidney, and sustained dislocations to his jaw and shoulder. Yet, despite the agonizing pain, the match triggered a massive career renaissance. 6 months later, the man McMahon once deemed unmarketable was crowned the World Wrestling Federation champion. However,